All right, so welcome to chapter 4. We will be talking about proportions. Now, in this chapter, we'll be talking about some rules around proportions, and now I'll kind of lean into creating different types of body types and talking about how you can create diverse body types based on knowing the rules of proportions, because not two bodies are generally the same. But I'll give you guys a rundown of what you can be expecting in terms of proportions. So what we can do is use the body parts of the body to measure other body parts and even use parts of our body as a unit of measurement. This is very common. A lot of artists do this. I do this all the time, right? The most common unit of measurement that artists like to use is the head. The average human body is about 7 to 8 heads tall. So 7 to 8 heads tall, that's generally the ballpark that we're aiming for, right? That's an adult human person. For children, it's going to be a bit different, obviously, because they're still developing, right? So as you can see here, I've taken this guy's head. Now remember, we're looking at him from kind of underneath here because the camera is a little bit lower. So just take that into consideration. But roughly, if I take into consideration the cranium is back here, this is roughly the size of the head, and then we can kind of measure that and count down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down towards the base of the foot, right? So that's pretty much straightforward right there. Then we can move into like the different parts of the body that we have to remember, right? So we have the arm length. So when the arms are relaxed at the sides, the fingertips should reach approximately midway between the hip and the knee. So this is a way for us to kind of now measure the length of something or the size of something using other body parts. So if you go from here all the way down here, right, we can see that the fingers are roughly in the midway point. Now his fingers are a bit curled up. If his fingers were all the way stretched out, it'll probably be around here, right? But that's roughly the midway point. On some people, it's going to be a little bit higher up, or some people it's going to be a little bit lower down. Like I've seen some guys that have such long arms, they can literally scratch their knee. Like that's how long their arms are, right? It's pretty crazy. Then you have leg length. So the legs, when standing straight, are usually around 4.5 to 5 heads long. So if we count here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So roughly about, yeah, like 4.5 for this guy. So he's around 4.5 heads tall in terms of the length of the legs. Now, on some people, it's going to be a little bit taller, especially for women. Women tend to have shorter torsos and longer lengths, but that's kind of like an average, not necessarily the rule. Hand size, so the length of the hand from the base of the palm to the tip of the middle finger is approximately the same as the length of the face from hairline to chin. So that would be from here to here. So if you were to like put your own hand on your face right now, it will usually cover the whole face, roughly, right? The hands width when open is roughly the same as the width of the face as well. So if you were to have like stretching out your fingers and you cover your face with your own hand, right? The whole hand will cover the whole face approximately. Foot size. So the length of the foot is usually equivalent of the length of the forearm. So from the elbow to the wrist. So if I take this here, roughly, it should roughly be similar in terms of the length. Okay, remember this is a little bit in perspective here, but you can see here, you can see how long the foot is. So you can see, yeah, that's pretty substantial, right? You would think it's a bit shorter, but that's roughly the length of the foot. Now I think this foot here is a little bit larger just because that we're looking at it from a slight perspective here. So there's a ever so slight foreshortening just to take into consideration. But yeah, the foot is quite long if you compare it with like the forearm. Shoulder width. So the width of the shoulders are approximately 2.5 heads in width. So if we were to take the head here, right, it will be roughly around 2.5 heads in terms of width here, roughly, right? And like in certain people, especially like guys who have like very wide shoulders, they will have roughly around 3 and sometimes even like 3.5 shoulders in terms of width, because like they have like really broad shoulders, a lot of muscle mass. On women, it tends to sometimes be like 2.5, sometimes even 2 if they have very, very narrow shoulders. So this will depend again from person to person and even gender. And then you have waist and hips. So the waist is typically narrower than the hips. The hips are generally at the same level as the crotch, and they should be wider than the waist. So if you look here, on this guy, he's very lean, so you can see his waist here is slightly narrower than the hips right here, ever so slightly. There will be a more extreme difference in terms of waist to hips ratio in women than in men, but men also have slightly narrower waists than hips. Now, if you have more like body fat, then obviously there's going to be more love handles, and that's going to, create a difference. So now the proportions are going to be slightly different because there's more body fat kind of covering in that area. Some guys even have very, very overdeveloped obliques, and the obliques are actually so wide that they're even wider than the hips, if you can believe it or not. Then you have the elbow. So the elbow is above or is on the same level as the navel. So on this guy, like the navel is right here, the elbow is like right above the navel. Women's navels, they tend to be a little bit higher right here, okay, than men. So it'll be right on the line. I don't always measure by the navel. I sometimes tend to measure by the end of the ribs, like right about here in the midsection here. I find that a little bit more convenient for me, at least. Again, and when it comes to like the elbow length, it will be on like roughly sometimes a bit higher, sometimes a bit lower, okay? And that's like the general overview in terms of like how we can measure the body. There's more than one way to like measuring the body. Like if you had to measure like the length of from the hips down to the knee and so on and so on. Because I will use certain body parts and compare like with the references, and then I will compare my drawings to those references and see what body part I can kind of compare, like using hands or using like the foot. For example, using the foot to compare with the forearm is a great way to do things like this. Now, note, every body is unique. So no two bodies have the same proportions. Very important, right? This gives us the flexibility as artists when drawing people. This is super nice to know. I think some people, when they're studying proportions, they almost think that, oh yeah, every person is like 7 heads tall, or if they have a different rule to go by, like 8 heads tall or something. That's not necessarily the case, right? Obviously, there are averages that we tend to work with here, like kind of like playing with hot and cold. Like if you push things too far, yeah, it starts to break, but we don't have to be super rigid either, and that puts off a lot of pressure from us. And that's generally it in regards to measuring the body.